All right, the All Madden thing. Documentary coming out Christmas Day, 2 p.m. It's pretty exciting to me because, like, I grew up, John Madden was football for me as like a kid, like a teenager. My first video game I ever played was, like everybody else that's in their 30s.
Boom!
Yeah, you got all the one-liners. You grew up watching him handing out the turducken on Thanksgiving. He was so good at his second career that people forgot he was a coach. I think, as a compliment to you, I think a lot of people, very young people that see you as a pitchman and on TV, like very young people might not know much about your career. And I think that's a tremendous testament. Strahan's doing the same thing with all the things he's doing. But John Madden was football to me growing up. I wonder, before we talk about John, was there somebody that was your John Madden growing up?
Not growing up. I mean, it wasn't the same. My road to college and to pro football wasn't the same as yours. And we also didn't have the same access, the video games, the, satellite TV, access to all the games. For me as a young player, though, particularly when I was in college, it was all the Steelers, being in Philadelphia and, going to school at Villanova. And they were kind of in their heyday. And then,
so you just skipped the Eagles. We never talked about this.
No, I like the Eagles, but you have to remember, I mean, Joe Green was the guy that I kind of, was real high on, and Jack Lambert, who I ended up, and you have this kind of vision of what Jack Lambert was and is. And then I got to play in the Pro Bowl with Jack Lambert, and he's smoking a cigarette, and he's got that Pittsburgh Pirates hat on that, he probably should have thrown out 8-9 years earlier. And he's taping his own hands at the Pro Bowl. And he was exactly the way you thought he would be. He was grumpy, short, had no time for any kind of, chit chat conversation. He was just all about ball and getting a beer and going back to the hotel. But John, when I got to pro football, obviously when you play for the Raiders, John Madden casts a big shadow on the organization. They hired him at that time, I think it was 34 years old. I think was the age. And at that time, that was unheard of. Now it's commonplace.
So how does that happen?
Well, I think because, and it's an interesting trajectory, because I think when John was hired, let's say Al Davis ends up here. Okay. When John was hired, Al was here and John was here, and those elevators kind of rose together and they started to build that franchise. Remember, that franchise was founded in 1960.
Right.
And he hires John Madden after they were, I think they had some time coaching together in San Diego. And Al came up and he was the head coach of the Raiders, which people don't realize, for 1 or 2 years. And it was the single biggest turnaround of any team in the NFL for a long time. And John had, when you think about the colorful characters they had on those teams and the games, the historical games, the Heidi game, the Holy Roller, the Immaculate Reception, those great matchups with the Steelers, and getting over that hump and winning a Super Bowl and getting to 100 wins. I think at that time, it was either the first or second fastest to get to 100 wins in 10 years. And then just saying, I'm going to walk away from it. And the conventional kind of view on what a broadcaster looked like and sounded like was more traditional and straightforward. There wasn't a lot of personality and there wasn't a lot of humor. It was very bland, and it was straightforward calling the game. I think John came in, he might have had a stain on his shirt from a hot dog, and he's like, hey, I'm going to do this broadcasting thing, and I'm going to talk about the big fat offensive lineman and look at the rear end on that guy, and boom, all that stuff. He didn't start at the top, and he worked his way up, and very quickly John became and redefined the way game broadcasts were done. And you knew that when John came to town, if you were a player, when John came to town, it was the game. it was the most watched game. And when John Madden had a conversation with you, and whatever he said was so significant to you, because brilliant guy, great coach, obviously an incredible personality, and a visionary in terms of how to, one, broadcast a game. And when you think about it, when CBS lost the package and Fox got football, and I retired that year, it was basically a blank sheet of paper, and it's Fox Sport. At that point, what was Fox famous for? It was kind of like, The Simpsons and, cartoons. And what John brought was instant credibility from a football standpoint to Fox Sport, which at that time was just football. And then Jimmy Johnson, Terry Bradshaw, they hired me, and on and on and on. They hired a young Joe Buck not shortly after that. And John, I think Fox Sports redefined the way, number one, games are done. I think pregame shows are done. And John was a very big impact on my broadcasting career. Because one of the things that John said to me early on was, people get caught up in this broadcasting thing. You just remember this. At the end of the day, you're a football player, and you're not a broadcaster. You're a football player. You're a football player who's broadcasting, and at your core, that's who you are. And don't forget that. And that was impactful. And I think John was, the millions and millions and the generation after generation of young fans he brought into the game, not only with the video game, but also educating them on how to, build a team, how to, I know that game evolved over the course of time. And I think John is still the conscience of Fox Sports. And I think in many ways, he's the conscience of one of the guys that drives the NFL. I think when Roger Goodell needs to make a call and needs advice, I think John Madden's a good person to pick up the phone call.
You said, backing up, that he left early. Like, compare that to a coach now. Like what coach leaving early would that be akin to in today's NFL?
Geez, I'm trying to think of a young coach. It would have to be a young coach who had immense success.
So if Matt LaFleur coached another 7 years and was dominant.
Okay, let's say Matt LaFleur wins the championship and he gets to 100 wins in 9 years, 10 years, 9 years, let's say, and says, listen, John walked away from Kenny Stabler. He walked away from Art Shell. He walked away from Gene Upshaw, Cliff Branch. It wasn't like the cupboard was bare.
Right.
For him to do that. And I think, I think it was, from what I gather, claustrophobia, and being in a plane and claustrophobic and having a bad experience on a flight. And he just couldn't do it anymore.
That was what it was. It was an airplane. The bus thing is a real deal.
It's a real deal. It's a real deal. I think, if the story, and I think part of it maybe could be in the Madden documentary, on that bad flight, he said a prayer and said,
if you get me out of here, I'm going to take a bus everywhere.
I'll never get on another airplane in my life.
That's crazy.
And he never did.
What were the veteran accounts that you heard? Because you missed him by 3 years. Like, what were the veteran accounts on the team of his style of coaching? Tough, fair, fun? Like, was he a player's coach because of his youth?
When it was time to play, you play. When it's time to show up, you show up. It was, to say it was, I just mentioned some of the guys. You're talking about, Jack Tatum. You're talking about Otis Sistrunk. You're talking about Art Shell, Gene Upshaw, Freddie Blitnikoff, Cliff Branch, Dave Casper, Kenny Stabler, John Matuzak. There were some late nights involved with that team. And, the one thing that I think John, and this is from the stories that I've heard, the old adage of don't worry about the horse being blind, just load the wagon and our guys will show up. and his guys did show up, and I think they loved and respected. And I think there's a healthy amount of fear with any coach, and I think John was brilliant in how he handled all those personalities, and also dealing with an owner who knew as much football as any coach in football. So that's an added kind of dimension to the whole story. But I think when I got there and Tom Flores took over, and Tom did an amazing start to his career with being the first team to go from the wild card to, they beat Philadelphia in the Super Bowl. And then that team struggled the next year, my rookie year, and then we won again in '83. So, but John's aura and presence was always a part of that organization, that whole commitment to excellence. And we might be guys who might get in a little too late or not show up necessarily in the best shape. But when it comes time and the light goes on, our group's going to play.